Okay, perfect. So again, welcome. And yeah, so the whole point of today's meeting is that you can form a real research question and you can find out what specifically you're interested to. Because during this workshop, you're going to find out that many people are not too narrow on their research. And what that can cause is that you can be way too broad and it's going to make your question not researchable at all. So yeah, let me just fix Caesar's camera and we should be good to go because I believe he is not be able to turn on his camera. So let me just fix Caesar's. Just one sec. Some technical issues right here. Let me just do it right here. Interesting. Okay. It's weird. Response controls. Okay. Okay. Now, sorry about that. Okay. So now let's begin to our second slide of today. So first of all, let's talk about what you get wrong before we tell you how to fix it. So many students say that they want to, for example, study medicine or they want to study social media. Or let's say they even want to go a bit narrow. I want to study cancer. But again, what exactly are you trying to study? Because cancer is 200 different diseases. Or social media, what specific platforms? What specific age group? What specific demographics? So in research, in order to give answers, you have to go really, really narrow in what you're trying to do. And as you find out, once you get into undergraduate school, once you get into grad school, and once you get into PhD, your focus becomes much, much, much narrower. For example, as a PhD student, you're only studying one single question within a topic. And by the end of it, you would be one of the most knowledgeable people in that specific field. So as you study more, you have to narrow down your stuff. And this is exactly the same with research. You want to narrow it down as much as possible, but not too much where data collection is impossible. So there's this sweet spot between where you should be able to do research. And the gap between a topic and a research question is where most people get stuck. Like today, we're going to close that gap and turn your favorite topic into a research question in a live student activity. So stay tuned for that. Now, most people write questions like this. For example, I've seen people and many of my students say that, for example, is social media bad for teens, right? Now, this is more specific than just I want to say social media, of course. But it is a very horrible question because what kind of social media? How much exposure are we talking about? So you have to account for all these factors. And once you go too specific, again, and too broad, your research question is not going to be able to stand out among thousands of different papers on social media for teams. And again, here are few reasons that you might be able to fail. So for instance, it is too broad. Social media could mean anything. So for example, social media could mean YouTube. Social media could mean Twitter or X. Social media could mean a bunch of different other things. So just categorizing social media is way too broad for a research question. And again, bad is also very emotional because in research specifically, we don't make decisions like that. For example, in your paper, you're not going to be able to come up with conclusions. Again, you're going to be able to conclude what you have done. But again, one paper in the grand scheme of research is just one single data point, and there's not going to be any trend. But once we get, let's say, hundreds of papers backing the claim that social media exposure might affect brain activity for teens, then yes, we can, of course, say and make a claim that there's a likely chance that it's going to be bad for teens. And not measurable, yes, of course. So for example, how are you going to measure how is it bad for teens? Like, what does bad mean? You have to define bad. So can any of you guys transform this question into a good research question? Type it in the chat. I want to see what do you guys think a good version of this question would be. Okay, I'm just gonna wait. Again, no wrong answers here. Just try to come with a better question for the specific topic. How does social media affect teenagers? Okay, now that is good because we narrowed down bad, but we still need to get a bit more specific. Does social media actually affect teen sleep cycle? Okay, so this is again more specific, and I like this scope with sleep cycles because now you're measuring health metrics instead of just saying does it affect them. How does social media increase the rate of depression in teens? Now this is a great one, but again, with this one you have to also define what kind of social media. Is social media exposure in the morning bad for teens? Okay, so I love the part in the morning because you can talk a lot about the stuff that happens in our bodies in the morning. But again, bad, you can't necessarily define, okay, how do you measure bad? You understand? So you have to narrow down that one specifically out. Okay, does Instagram cause a lack of attentiveness in teenagers? That is a great research question. So that is the sweet spot of how much narrow. Again, you can go much more narrow because what does it mean to attentive? What specifically about attentiveness are you going to measure? But again, it's a very great question. Is social media contributing to risking mental health issue over a long period of time? Yeah, this is going to be probably like a meta-analysis question. But again, it is a very good question. If you just try to narrow down what social media means, so are you talking about video platforms or are you talking about text platforms? Does social media have a negative mental effect on teenagers? Yeah, I mean, that could work as well. Just we're trying to narrow down what age groups are we talking about. So for example, when we say teenagers, are we talking about 12 to 14-year-olds? Are we talking about 14 to 17-year-olds? Like you have to narrow down the specific age group that you're studying as well. Is short form content harmful to a teenager's mental health and conclusiveness? I mean, I think it's a good question. Is short form? Okay, yeah, this is a great question because short form content, you're narrowing down the specific content type. Okay. Is short form content harmful to teenagers' mental health and yeah, so this is a great question. And again, this is also a very interesting question because of how prominent short form content is in today's age. How does spending long time on TikTok before sleep affect their brain activity? Yeah, this is a great question because you narrow down the social media, once you also narrow down the content type, you narrow down the time, and you're also going after brain activity. Now, one step above this would be specifically what about brain activity? What kind of brain activity are we talking about? But again, great stuff. How does social media affect the brain of a teenager rather than adult? So now this is a comparative one. And this is going to be a great research topic. But I would just narrow down on what kind of social media and what about their brain. But again, great. I love the comparison as well. Does short form media consumption degrade the growth of adolescence? Okay, so this is good. But again, so the adolescence, I love it. The short form media consumption, again, great, specific. I would just be careful of degrading the growth because how are you going to measure growth? Are you talking about physical growth or mental growth? Specifically, what about their growth? And again, you're trying to see, does it affect them at all? So great question, Nicholas. Okay, so how does overstimulating social media content affect their real life interactions and daily life of teens? So social media kind of real life interactions and daily life of teens. Now this is great, but overstimulating it doesn't mean anything because again we want to be specific about the content type because overstimulating you probably mean short form content. So I would just put short form content, real life interactions, and daily life of teens. Yeah, you can. Would be a great research question. Does constant scrolling affect a teenager's attention span? Yeah, this is a very measurable thing because you can measure attention span with online tests. So yeah, this is a good research question. It just needs a bit of tightening and narrowing down. Now I'm going to read two more and we're going to get to the other ones. Let's see these two. Okay. To what extent is heavy TikTok use, more than 3 hours daily, correlated with symptoms of depression in high school students? And yeah, because you identified the TikTok as the platform, you also included what does it mean heavy use, so more than 3 hours daily. Correlated. So I loved when you mentioned correlated, because many people make the mistake of saying correlation and mistaking correlation for causation. So it is great that you're studying the correlation and not trying to actually come up with any conclusions. Now, as well, how does exposure to social media, Instagram, influence eating behavior in teenagers 13 to 17 measured by daily caloric intake? So this is also a very real research question. So you see, guys, at first we were talking about how does social media affect teenagers, but now we are talking about how specifically it affects them with calorie intakes, their eating behaviors, and what kind of social media. So you see how we can get very narrow in research, and that is the end goal, because in research, the way we answer big problems is by solving a lot of small ones. So for example, let's look at cancer, right? In cancer research, if you want to just go over cancer, it is going to be 200 different diseases. But if we tackle them each one of them, like at a time, we're going to have much more success, and we can experiment with a lot of more techniques. So that is how we tackle real problems and real world problems at all in research. Now, the next one. So how do I create a research question? And this is kind of like a blueprint or like a funnel of how it should work out. So every strong research question is a result of narrowing. You always want to cut stuff that don't mean anything, or you want to narrow this stuff that are too broad. You want to start right, as we start in today's discussion, and go very, very narrow and precise. So I would like to ask one of you guys to raise your hand, and I want to do this with you. I want to narrow down one of your specific interests. So just raise one of your hands, and I will narrow down one of your interests using this funnel. Okay. Soliana, you can unmute. Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Okay.
Okay. Am I just supposed to state like a topic?
Yeah, so like what are you curious about? Broad interest, anything that sparks like anything that interests you, anything that you're passionate about, basically.
Aerospace engineering.
Okay, aerospace engineering. Now, what about aerospace engineering do you like?
Rockets.
Rockets. Okay, so we're getting more and more narrow, like social media. Okay. Now, what kind of rockets?
Specifically the rockets that make use of thrust control strategies.
Okay, so now we have thrust control strategies rockets, which I don't know anything about, but again, cool, let's go. So populations. So again, you can't really study rockets on population, but what you can substitute is, let's say, techniques or different ways of engineering rockets. So you can study that, and then measurable outcome. So what do you want to get out of this paper? So let's say I want to do thrust control rockets paper on different engineering methods on how to reduce cost efficiency based on this metric. So that is how you can perform real research questions. So we went from studying rockets to wanting to find out how we can make them more fuel efficient, specifically in thrust control scenarios, right? So you understand how this is a really helpful tool, because honestly, just ask yourself, so what? Okay, so rockets are very cool. So what? Like, what kind of rockets are cool? Always trying to narrow down your specific topic is going to help you in research a lot, and it's going to save you time as well. So yeah, we have time for one another. So research doctor, if you want, you can. Research doctor, is he here? Okay, never mind then. Okay, so let's move to the second slide. Now, so let's talk about, let's do another example here. So let's say my curiosity is that I want to do social media and mental health. I want to go into how social media affects my mental health, or like in general, I love to study social media. Then the topic, I want to go to Instagram specifically. I want, because Instagram, who doesn't like Instagram? Am I right? So I'm going to study Instagram. And population, let's say Canadian teens age 14 to 18. Again, here we don't even classify by age. We also say their nationality. So which is going to be a very important part of research because we want to narrow down our study group as much as possible. Now, behavior daily Instagram use. Now, again, I would actually go against this and say, okay, what does daily mean? So how much a day are they actually using? Because some people might use it for 20 minutes a day. Some people might use it for 5 hours a day. So daily use is not sufficient here enough. Now, outcome, self-reported anxiety levels. Yeah, so you ask them, how did you feel before using it? How do you feel after using it? And that would give you an actual set of data points that you could use. And correlation between use and anxiety. So each step in the questioning perspective adds a constant, adds a variable. And what does that mean is that we can control more variables if we narrow down our topics. But if we say just cancer or just say social media, we don't have any control over other variables. For example, if I just want to do a paper on social media, I can't control what kind of social media they're using. If I just want to do cancer, I can't have any control of the specific type of cancer that I'm studying. So by narrowing it down, we also control every other variable that we don't want to study and just focus on one single variable. That is how research is designed to be. So yeah. Now, so here's the final question that we have for social media that I believe could be more detailed. But again, you don't want to also overdo yourself. So does daily Instagram use correlate with self-reported anxiety levels in Canadian teens aged 14 to 18? Now, this is great for a couple of reasons. First of all, Instagram, specific type of content. Again, Instagram is very broad because you can't be, for example, there's Reels, there is normal Instagram carousel. So again, Instagram is not narrow enough, but it's way narrower than social media that we've begun with. Now, correlate. Now, I want you guys to understand something. So just because something correlates with something doesn't mean that it causes something. And just because something causes something, like for example, most of us have heard of the saying that correlation does not equal causation. And what that means is that there has to be a specific way of explaining why it might cause something. For example, again, I've probably mentioned this example before. Autism rates and organic food growth have a very strong correlation. But again, that doesn't mean that autism is caused by organic foods or organic food cell increase was caused by autism. So you understand how they're correlated, but they don't cause each other. The same could be true with Instagram use over time and the decline of attention span. So we have to understand that in one single paper, we are not making any causational claims unless we have the evidence and unless we are able to explain it, which in 99% of the circumstances you don't. Specifically at a high school stage, you have nowhere near enough reason to be able to have a causational relationship. So yeah, this is how a research question should sound. Again, you can of course narrow it down, add more complexity to it, but this is how a solid one would sound. And it has 5 components, 1 sentence, a question that you can actually answer with evidence. Now, I want to ask you guys a couple of questions. So, what makes a topic researchable? Like, for example, why do we narrow it down? Why do you guys think we narrow it down? Because I told you guys right now to narrow it down, but I never explained what is the point of narrowing down your topic. So give us like 2 answers, 3 answers in the chat, and I'll read them out loud. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay, so why do we, okay, to solve okay, so that we solve one specific problem that leads to more solutions. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is a very thoughtful answer. Thanks, research officer. To target a specific question, yes. To get an answer as specific as possible. Again, all great answers. You're genuinely passionate about. Yes, exactly. Okay, sorry, Ryan. Okay, okay, I'm going to refer you as Ryan right, anymore. Sorry. So we can offer another perspective for another possible to a specific question. These are all great answers, and what you guys are saying is the result of narrowing down the question. But the reason we actually do it is for our own convenience, because if we have a very broad topic, we can't really research it, and if we can't really research it, we can't produce any reliable results. So that is the whole point. It is for our own convenience and study design. Okay. Yeah, you can have an effective sample and more accurate results. It helps find precise sources without wasting time on unrelated facts. Yeah, again, these are all great. And what these answers all hint to is to your own convenience. And it's going to make you have a much easier time being able to arrange the study. Again, if you go too narrow, it's going to make it a lot harder to arrange the study. For example, finding only 15-year-old Canadian high school students who use Instagram on a daily basis more than 3 hours a day is going to be a challenge. But if you go a bit broader, but also not too narrow, that's the sweet spot. So now let me read this. So clear population, age 14 to 18 and specific and accessible. So specifically when you're doing research, when there's a population involved and you have to actually get participants, the key thing is to always have an age range and not a specific age. And as well, then another thing is to always take into account how hard it is going to be to get that service. Like only if there's like 100,000 students that are age 15 and use Instagram more than 5 hours a day, then I don't think it's going to be worth your time going after that when you can maybe a bit broaden your population. Now, measurable outcome, daily Instagram use, tracked in hours or frequency. So you want to have a quantitative outcome that you can measure with statistics. Specifically in STEM, you always want to have a quantitative outcome. And again, there are some surveys, for example, anxiety scores. But those are often like survey studies in general. Like if you're using surveys to collect data, I would seriously recommend against it because surveys are one of the least reliable sources of information. Because, for example, one of the survey questions might ask, did you like how we gave you Instagram? Like you can frame the question in such a way that some people will say yes and some people will say no. So you can manufacture different results and lead to different biases. So I would avoid surveys as much as you can. But again, if you're a high school student, that's probably the only ways that you can actually get people to join your research project. So do that where you go with it. So specific outcomes, self-reported anxiety collected by a survey. Now, this part, it is going to be the least accurate part of your research paper because people don't know themselves as much as biological numbers would. And if you leave it to them for self-anxiety levels, you can even cause a placebo effect. So you have to be very careful when collecting data using surveys. Define relationship. Okay, so am I studying a causational relationship or am I studying a correlational relationship? Correlation is a statistical relationship that you can test. And correlation, what we say is that basically two set of data are follow this pretty much the same trend. Again, it is going to be a bit different, of course, but when we say correlation, it means that they generally overlap in some sort of a trend. Realistic scope. Doable with a school research project timeline. So again, going back to the rockets research paper, the only way that you can realistically study rockets is either if you work at NASA or SpaceX, or if you do a computational paper, which we will get into within the upcoming weeks. And that is where computational sciences are so useful because high school students didn't used to be able to study MRI images or study rockets, but now they can because of something called computational sciences and computational research. For example, we have this whole field called computational neuroscience, where we use biocomputers, which sounds very cool, I know. So yeah, now to the next slide. So the research question formula. Again, this formula is a generic and general formula. For your specific topic, for example, this formula failed for the rocket question because the rocket question wouldn't study a population. But again, this is a very great starting point to use. So a population plus variable 1 plus variable 2 plus relationship plus context. So let's do this formula with another person. Anyone wants to raise their hands? We can narrow down your topic as well in class. Anyone wants to raise their hands? Guys, I know it's Monday, but okay, no one wants to raise their hand. Okay, I'll just ask you guys in chat then. Give me a specific topic that you want to. Can you guys raise your hands for this specific question formula? Okay. Sorry, I think my mic. Okay, it should be fixed now. Sorry. So what I basically asked is that if you guys want anyone if you guys want to narrow down their own topic using this research question formula. So if you want to narrow down your topic in class, you can just raise your hand right now. I will take it up for you. So Liana, I think we already did one with you. So okay, Ryan. So let me just yeah, okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so I was thinking like when we have wounds on our hand, we apply those ointments on them, and then like due to our work and everything, they just get erased from that place. So I was thinking we could do something for that, find a solution for that specific problem.
Okay, so could you repeat the problem again? You got lagged out for a sec. I'm sorry.
Okay, so like when you have a kind of a wound on your hand and
Mhm.
you apply those ointments on them. So due to your work and all that stuff, it just gets removed from it. So I was thinking if we could find a solution for that.
Okay, so that is already specific enough. But again, if you want to find a solution for that, then you have to do a design experiment. So you have to find a prototype and then you have to test that prototype to see how you can fix it. But what this question formula is about is just trying to do correlational research. We're trying to see if there is a relationship between two things. But again, for study design or for experiment design, or like if you want to design a prototype, then that is a completely different process. And what it is basically that you design the prototype, you test it on a certain population to see if variable X change variable Y. And that way you can say the prototype worked or the prototype failed. But again, the thing that you're referring to is a very costly experiment. So developing a prototype is going to cost at least hundreds of thousands of dollars. But again, there are of course computational ways that we can combat that. Any other person? If not, I can just read it off the slide. Okay, Samiha. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Hello, good morning.
Hello. What is your specific research interest, or like what this the thing that is you're passionate about in research specifically?
Give an easy example. So, if we look at the soil condition to understand the fruit yield, then the variable's gonna be soil salinity and soil conductivity, and the relationship that we are like looking at is how it impacts the fruit yield and the health of the plant overall. So
Yeah. Okay. So great. You have two variables. You have a population, which is the plant, and for a relationship, how it yields it. That is a great context. For relationship, you're probably referring to, actually, yeah, an impact relationship could work. Yeah. Again, great research topic. Just making sure you have one specific research question and tying it up. Again, great start on your research topic. So, and we had a question. We had an example on the chat as well. How does daily use of Instagram among children entering adolescence causes changes in their dopamine levels? So let's identify the variables here. So one variable is daily use of Instagram. The second variable is changes in dopamine levels. So that is our two variables. Our population is going to be the children entering adolescence. So that is a very specific range, and I would just put numbers into that as well. But again, great. Relationship, how does it affect it? So again, we're probably looking at a correlational study, and context causes changes in their dopamine levels and adolescence. Yeah, okay, so this is a great question. Just a bit more specific on the age range, but again, great stuff. To what extent does pattern of public perception and acceptance of CRISPR-Cas9 based editing and prime editing distinguish in therapeutic, including potential generic homogenization shifts in population by morbidity and long-term health goods? So this is a great question. It is very long, but it is very specific as well, because acceptance of CRISPR-Cas9 based editing and prime editing distinguishing therapeutic form from elective human enhancement forecast critical societal and biological outcomes. So forecast critical societal and biological outcomes, again, what specifically about it, but again, great. Including potential genetic homogenization, shifts in population-wide disease vulnerability, and long-term healthcare resource allocation. So yeah, this is a great example of what a research question should be. Application of artificial intelligence in diagnostic imaging. So when we say artificial intelligence, there are a lot of different artificial intelligences, or AI, as we say. So for example, what we use on a daily basis like ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini, they are LLMs, or large language models. But we also have CNNs, which are convolutional neural networks. And what these are is that they're basically great at processing images. So what you can say, and you can narrow this down, is that how do CNNs impact the impact of CNNs in diagnostic imaging? But again, what kind of diagnostic images? Are we talking about MRIs? Are we talking about X-ray scans? Are we talking about CT scans? So again, narrowing it down, and as well narrowing down what part of the body are we looking at? What age or demographic of people are we looking at under those scans? How does musical training changes gray matter in brain region involving in motor skills? Okay. Yeah, this is a very fun. I'm curious about it myself. Musical training changes gray matter in brain regions. Well, now I've just narrow down your population that you're studying. But again, great. How does exposure to more arts made through generative AI instead of human affect the value teenagers hold for arts? Okay, so this is one of those examples that is very narrow, and it is a very great question. But what you can see that you can struggle with is, how do you measure the value of teenagers that they hold for art? You can use a survey, but again, surveys are not the best data form. So I would just keep on making sure that that is a very measurable outcome. Is GDP, gross domestic product, the most accurate way to measure a country's economic size? Okay, so this is a great question. I love economics myself, but I would just like, for example, compare it to other benchmarks as well. So for example, what are you comparing nominal GDP to? GDP to. So for example, a nominal GDP versus GDP per capita, or like all these different ways to measure economic impact or economic size. Um, it was about monitoring and finding a solution. Great, Ari, that's great. So again, we have a bunch of people who have done amazing things in this program, and by the end of it, we're hoping that we can help you even do more amazing things. So yeah, stay tuned, and yeah, so let's get to the next slide. Actually, let's read this one first. So the formula we talked about, but here's an example or direct comparison. Is AI bad for school? Yeah, but like, what do you mean? What kind of AI? What kind? You understand what I'm saying? Does weekly ChatGPT use correlate with homework completion rates among grade 11 students? That is a much stronger question. Does sleep matter? Well, what kind of sleep? Does average nightly sleep predict test performances among IB students, among university students? So you understand how it could be very different. Strong question names: the who, the what, and how you measure it. Yeah, that's basically, if you guys want to take a screenshot from this slide, again, it will be posted, but just to have an idea of how you should form your research question. Okay, so again, we also, when we talk about research, we want to make sure that our results are measurable. So vague words kill research questions. So for example, bad, helps, students, social media. So bad, we can use sleep hours, we can use grade percentages, we can use anxiety scores. Helps, recall scores, completion, accuracy percent, or even IQ tests. Students, grade 11 IB students in Ontario, or for example, grade 12 students, in Miami, Florida. For example, like you can go as narrow as you can, but again, at the high school level, you don't want to go too narrow, so you're not even able to do research. Social media, Instagram, they'll use screen time in minutes. So yeah, narrowing it down as much as possible. Okay, so now here's a activity that I want to do with you guys. Pick a topic and write one research question. Again, I know you guys already did this, but just do it one more time. But again, this time I want you to share it to me in the next meeting. So tomorrow we're going to also have a meeting, and we're going to continue that. And tomorrow I will be asking you guys, maybe like 2 or 3 of you guys, to share your research question. I want to go ahead and actually study the topic that you like, and come up with one research question that you're probably going to pursue. So yeah, let's move to another slide. This is our last slide. And great research, like the research that makes you go crazy, right? The research that looks like miracles starts with a clear question. For example, some students measured CRISPR-Cas9. That started with a very narrow question. But again, the applications of the technology became wider and wider. For example, AlphaFold, it started as a very narrow algorithm, but it used AI to go broader and broader. So you have to start with something very narrow, but then you can broaden up the research if you see success. Now, it doesn't mean to, like in research, many of the students, and I see this every day and it hurts me, is that they're trying to sound too smart. It's not about being smart, it's about being clear and precise. So there's a clear difference. Again, if you are smart, you're also probably clear and precise, but you're not trying to sound smart. You're trying to make research as coherent as possible. You're not trying to use complex terminology that you don't even understand. And if we want to take away something from this meeting and this session, it would be the following fact: that a research question is not merely a topic. It is a precise, measurable statement of what you want to find out. It is like a research question is not like any other question that you have. It is very specific and precise. Now, again, during Research Canada, you guys know it. We help Canadian students and again students across the globe to ask better questions and find real answers. So, Caesar, what are your thoughts on the slideshow, and what do you think about forming a research question based on your experience? Again, I know you're kind of in a busy situation, but
Yeah, no worries. Yeah. I've been listening to the whole thing. I think it's really thorough, right? Narrowing down the idea, think of it like a funnel is a really good analogy on how you actually create a really useful research question. So I agreed with everything you said, and I think it's very thorough. So it's pretty good.
all right.
Um,
Would you have time for answering any questions by any chance? Maybe like two or three?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
anyone who wants it, they can raise their hand and we can do a Q&A about the topic of asking research questions or forming a research interest in general. So, okay, some person asked, can you do different specific research based in a single broader topic, or you focus your career in one question? So, but based on your perspective, like, does your research career just focus on one single topic, or can you broaden it up as time you move forward with research?
That's a really good question. So when you, as you continue your educational career and get more, I guess, competent in terms of doing your research and all that, typically you would narrow down more and more. So it's not really you broaden up. You should basically the pathway into getting more specific in research is like university, undergraduate school. You look at a bunch of broader ideas. That's why you do like chemistry, physics, and biology classes, right? And then in graduate school, you're going to actually be doing like thesis projects and you're actually looking at a specific faculty. So let's just say the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. And you're going to really focus on that more niche topic. And then as you keep going further down the line, you're going to do potentially maybe a PhD. And that's when you're actually doing something incredibly niche. Basically, only like a handful of people are doing it with you. And when you do that, that's when you're actually able to create new knowledge and actually advance what we know about the universe, right? So
Yeah.
you're actually getting more niche, not more broader. That's what you're supposed to do in the early years, I would say, like in undergraduate school, high school, and even graduate studies.
Okay. Great answer. I agree as well. And until you got your PhD, you're all like, once you're in your PhD, again, you probably know this way better than I do, but you're only tackling one question as like in your whole PhD year, trying to do your dissertation paper. So, yeah, as a high schooler, can I create a research essay as a product of just picking a topic and researching it online? Does there have to be an experiment, or is it better if I have one?
That's also a really good question. So research can be many things. There's actually a lot of value to what you just said. That is actually called meta-analysis reviews or systematic literature reviews. And a lot of researchers do that all the time. And it's a really useful thing that actually still provides new knowledge, provides people with the necessary information to continue advancing stuff. I know like research a lot of times sounds like you have to be in a lab doing experiments and all that, but these kinds of things where you just look at the existing literature and find patterns and all that is actually really valuable. In fact, a lot of the research projects that actually do experimentation go based off those kind of reviews and go based off what those people have already compiled throughout the existing literature already. So honestly, both are really useful and you don't necessarily have to have experimentation.
Yeah, great answer. I agree as well. And sometimes meta-analysis are far more useful than any paper could be, specifically from a public standpoint, because they kind of summarize what the current research says about a specific topic. Now, here's another question. Can a research question be too narrow?
Now, I guess, what do you mean by narrow? Like something that
Like
is,
it's something very, very specific. It can be it can be too much specific where you can't even measure it.
I guess it really depends on what kind of research milestone you're aiming at. Because again, I would say if you're doing a PhD, you're doing like as specific as possible, if I'm being honest with you. those kind of students that work towards that degree really look at only one super specific topic. So for their situation, I think it's okay for them to be super, super narrow. But in our stages, what our level is right now, I think it's better for us to be a little bit more general and less specific because of some constraints that we have, right? We don't have access to a lab. We don't have the necessary funding and all that, and maybe not even the correct mentorship to get that kind of nicheness, I would say, that
Yeah.
those kind of other students have. So I guess it really depends on your circumstances, and it's not a bad thing if you're going really, really narrow. That's actually how you create new knowledge, right? If
Yep.
you think of all our existing knowledge as like a circle, every little addition to that circle is just a tiny, tiny little bump, I would say. And that's because we're looking at really narrow ideas, right?
Yeah.
So
So,
it really depends.
great answer. And some student had a question for me. Are we submitting our research papers for feedback, or is it just an independent project? So you guys are submitting it as a final project in the classroom, and the top 5 papers that we see are going to be selected, and we're going to be contacting you to see how we can work further with you for a great project. So we're going to one-on-one mentor you. And what makes a research question effective rather than just interesting?
That's also a really good question. So again, the whole point of research is trying to create some kind of knowledge solution that you can actually be applied in real life and help our society, right? So
Yep.
it's honestly whatever has a good application, something that can be scalable, reproducible, and also can be feasibly done with the resources that you have at hand. So whatever question that fits all those criteria is what you should aim for.
Okay, got it. Now, let's look at another one. How do you know when a subjective experience in a specific, okay, sorry. How do you know when a subjective experience is specific enough to become a research question rather than just an interesting observation?
So like what do you mean by subjective experience? Like, are you saying like survey data, like as Samuel mentioned before, or something
I
about like
I believe so.
emo?
Yeah, I believe
Oh,
so.
okay. Or like maybe emotions, right? All those kind of things that you can't really measure. Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
Wait,
probably yes.
wait.
Let's check.
He's giving more detail in the chat. Hold on.
Certain dissociative disorders such as
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I see what you. Oh shoot. Okay. I see what you mean by now. I see what you mean by that question now. Um. There's always a way to measure even subjective stuff. We have the technology to do that. In those kind of types of studies where you're looking at something that happens cognitively inside the brain, for example, you said maladaptive daydreaming, there are ways to measure that still. Whether it's something that's really niche as of right now and not widely available, we're always constantly developing techniques that can measure that kind of stuff. So I'm sure there are like ways to measure that. For example, electrical signals in the brain, or even types of interactions with the proteins in your body to create some kind of signal that you can measure. So there's always a way to measure, and we're always trying to find techniques to do that. So I would say that in order to create a subjective experience, to be specific enough for that, you gotta evaluate what you have at hand, and then you could create something that is specific enough to use the instruments that you have. So again, it really depends on your circumstances, especially with that kind of topic, I would say.
And there's this quote from Galileo that says, measure what is measurable and make measurable what is not measurable. So again, just because it is
Exactly.
not measurable right now, you can maybe even make a device that could measure it. Who knows?
Exactly. Yeah, and I could give you a really good example of this. So, for example, you can one of the works of someone I know pretty well, they created a relationship between tumor growth and electrical signals. They made a device that can detect whether a tumor is spreading or something, right? They're connecting two different relationships to create some kind of correlation, a useful correlation. And that's how you measure something. Of course, you have to show that it's valid through experimentation, all that. But we can always create something that can be measurable. And it really just depends on how hard it is to measure it. But we can always find a way.
Great, great answer. Now there's Ava asking, how do you make sure your research can differentiate itself through its question? Is it necessarily bad to be too similar to other people?
Wait, could you repeat that again? I just it cut off for a little bit.
Oh, sorry about that. So the question was basically asking, is it too bad that our question is too similar to other papers?
Not necessarily. No, I wouldn't say that having it similar is a bad thing. Because another useful part of research is just providing further evidence of a known idea, right? The reason why a bunch of our stuff, our applications, our drugs and all that are so reliable is because we keep finding evidence that continues supporting it, right? So you could be honestly doing the exact same work, but just providing further evidence for it. And that can still be really useful because it just further proves that something is actually what it is. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad thing at all.
Yeah, and there's a specific field in research called reproducing other people's results. Like we have a bunch of papers just trying to reproduce other people's results to see if it's actually true or not. So yeah, again, great answer. Is it still acceptable to research on a topic where an answer already exists? It kind of goes back to the previous question as well.
Yeah, I guess it kind of does. Well, for us, I would say that it's easier to try to find something that you can add to the existing knowledge that we have. For us high schoolers, I feel like that's a little bit more straightforward, something that's more intuitive, right? Again, like the previous question, you can still further provide evidence to either support an idea or disprove an idea. But you really need to know a lot of knowledge to be able to do that. Because when you're trying to argue with other people's work, you got to make sure you actually know the knowledge well before actually beginning that kind of type of study. So for us, I think it's more straightforward to just think like adding something new
Great.
at our level.
Yeah. And when you find a research gap, how do you decide whether it's actually worth pursuing your time, like worth spending time on it and pursuing?
That's also a really good question. So again, the research gap is what we can actually take advantage of, what we can actually use as a baseline to determine our research question, right? That's something that's missing from our existing knowledge of a certain topic. And that means we can go to use that as a way to determine what we can do about it. But in terms of, so what was the second part of the question?
So when you find a good research gap, is it worth pursuing, or like how do we actually find out whether it is actually worth pursuing or not?
Okay. So yeah. Okay, I get what you mean. So you gotta do your reading thoroughly. One of the most important skills in research is you gotta make sure you actually know that gap exists. So in order to determine if it's worth pursuing, you gotta do your systematic literature reviews, and you got to just make sure that what you know already about that niche actually shows patterns and trends that's actually what's missing. And a lot of times you could determine that by looking at the discussion sections of papers or the conclusion sections of them. And then that's how you determine whether that gap actually exists and you could do something about it. And another thing that you have to consider is feasibility. Sometimes a gap is so niche and so advanced that you cannot even tackle it properly. And that's not really a good gap to pursue.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing to add is that don't be scared of failing. Like I know how crazy it may sound, but I was interviewing. We were interviewing Professor Zimmerman, and he basically said that people mention the research papers that have won me medals, but they don't measure the 50 or 60 papers that have turned out to be complete failures. So even if it is a failure, when you pursue it, that doesn't mean that it isn't publishable. Because if you publish it, you save other researchers potentially hundreds of hours instead of wasting their own time pursuing the topic. So again, just because you failed, it doesn't mean that it's not publishable. And it doesn't mean that it wasn't worth your time. But yeah, again, great answer from Caesar. And two more questions, and then we are done. As a high school student who wants to start research, is it better to start independently, or are labs and professors required?
That's a really good question. So I'd say again, it really depends. You can do research in many different ways, and uh, most likely you're gonna start by just doing your own thing because getting in a lab is kind of difficult, right? You gotta build your credibility. You have to get some prior experience most of the time before even reaching out. So that's why a bunch of STEM opportunities is really important to build that credibility. Um, I can give you a personal example for me. I started out doing experiments at home, and it was mainly towards science fair. So that was the STEM opportunity that I took advantage of to build my network, build that credibility before I actually reach out. And so I started independently initially because it's easier, right? It requires less resources. You can start right away, and a lot of times it does lead to better outcomes. Now, if you have experience or you have a really good connection that might have affiliations with a lab, you can for sure go reach out to a lab and get started right away. If you can do that, that's obviously amazing, right? You're gonna have a bunch of resources at hand at the very beginning. You gotta remember that if you're going to do that pathway, you gotta be on top of things because you're gonna quickly realize that everything's gonna be super fast paced and it's gonna be very demanding. So if you want to take that route to just immediately get in the lab, you have to make sure you're on top of things. But again, it really depends on your situation.
Yes, and another question: how do we approach a question or topic which has very little existing literature available? So there isn't that many research papers available on it. How do we approach it?
Um, Honestly, I would say that there's always a research paper on something. There's millions of papers are that we have at hand, and the issue is, I think what I see, um, why you think that there's not much literature is because many of them are um prevented. Like you get limited access because there's a paywall. Um, you don't have many papers that are open access for us high school students, so that's why it looks like there's a limited number of papers on it. And unfortunately, that's just something that we cannot control, right? But there is many ways that you can still do research on an idea that looks like you don't have much knowledge to go from. And I would say, number one, you should look at the connections you have. If you have anyone that may be affiliated with an institution, a university or college, they might have actual access to those papers. And maybe you can ask them to give you certain types of access, then you can read all those papers and then you can solve the problem right away.
Yeah.
Another thing is just you can also use certain artificial intelligence software. They actually help you bypass that paywall. But you have to be careful of those because some of them are kind of scammy. So be careful and be wary of that. But there are certain tools out there that can help you read those papers, even though there is a paywall behind them. And then the last one I would say is if you do have a connection with some kind of professional in your field, that's probably the best opinion you can have than any kind of paper, because that industry professional that you may have a connection with should provide information that will be able to answer all your questions. But that really depends on how big your network is. So maybe that's not the best way of looking at it. So it's really just optimizing what you have and then taking advantage of what gives you those knowledge. But there's always knowledge out there. I can guarantee that.
Yeah. The one thing that we don't have a lack of is knowledge in the internet. But again, so there's this question for me. It was mentioned that you would be talking about mentor matching in the session. So yes, as I mentioned, again, thank you very, very much for reminding me. I forgot to put it on the slideshow. But what the mentor matching is going to be that we are going to see the top 5 papers that you guys will submit. And based on that, we're going to one-on-one coach you with our mentors. So that is the whole point of this mentor matching opportunity. Again, that's an incentive for you to work hard towards your final paper. Again, your final paper doesn't have to be a 50-page long paper on curing cancer, for example. Like, as long as you give us even a good meta-analysis that has a great scientific understanding, we're going to take it, or a great mathematical understanding, like whatever topic it is. You show that you have the skills that are required to be a great researcher, and we're going to invest in it. We're going to use our publishing resources. We're going to use everything that we have to make sure that your project stands out. Again, with mentors like Caesar, who again, a great mentor for, again, us as well as you guys. So again, let's do one last question, because I know you're in a lab right now. So as students with no access to lab, would you recommend writing papers which introduces a self-made device or such innovations for our research interest? Your mic is muted.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Let me just read the question, so I can get a better idea of it.
Okay, great.
So so I see what type of project you're trying to refer to. That's basically an innovation project. And honestly, those kind of projects are one of the easiest ways to get started with a research project. I think it's the most intuitive way to um, begin research. For me, that was the most intuitive. I like making something and then testing it out and then seeing if it works or not, right? It makes sense, right? That looks like the common workflow. And I would say it's a pretty good way to start out, especially when you don't have access. Because again, you can do a lot of computational stuff, but to be honest with you, the research landscape for high schoolers is really saturated with that. And if you are, let's just say, doing science fair or just even trying to get access to a lab, having something physical that you created would be a really good thing to propose in both aspects. So um, personally, I think it's the easiest ways to get started. I'm not the best at computational stuff, but it's all about your preference. But it's really easy to test something that's physically there. But that's my perspective on that.
Yep, great answer. So we also have another question. The questions are keep on coming in. As a high schooler, how do we network without connections? Is the best way to cold email people?
That's a really good question. So I actually get that question a lot from my friends and just some people that are some other high school students that are also interested in getting in a lab. And honestly, if your network doesn't have connections, you have to build them. To be honest with you, connections is the number one way of getting in a lab. If you know the right person, they can put in a good word for you, and that's how you are able to get those internal access to these kinds of opportunities. Because getting access to a lab is not why like I would say publicly available, right? You can do summer research programs, you can do shadowing volunteering, but those are accessible to everybody. And a lot of times you're not actually doing impactful research with that. So a lot of times you're just either contributing to other people's work or you're just like shadowing and just looking at other people doing stuff. But I'm sure you want to actually be hands-on with this stuff, right? Do the experimentation, curate results and all that stuff. And honestly, you got to build that network to do that. And some ways to build that network is to be more involved in STEM, science fair, STEM Olympiads, publicly available conferences, symposiums, and all that can really gain opportunities for you to network with people and make those connections. In terms of cold emailing, I also suggest you doing that because that's the one of the easiest and most simplest ways of reaching out initially. And again, cold emailing is not that you don't have a high success rate with cold emailing. So that's where you gotta like send out dozens and dozens of them. But it's a good way to do simultaneously as you build your network. And there are strategies to it. And
Yeah.
it goes, I can go into a lot of detail with it, but we probably don't have time for that. So if you want more information on that, you can probably email me about it and I can send you more info.
Yep. And cold again, on our end, we also got almost all of the professors that we're working with through cold emailing. But again, also have something to tell the professor. So like if you have zero experience, you have never even, you don't even know what research is, cold emailing prof about research is not going to yield you any good answer. So you have to have a good story and a good set of resume to begin with. Okay, now the last question that we're going to have is, um, okay, so the last question is going to be from Rayan. Could you just unmute your mic because he has his hand up? So if you want to ask any questions.
Could you please repeat those research points you told us that we have to make a research paper? I left at that time.
Okay, so yeah, basically the whole idea is that you have to make a manuscript or a rough draft of your project in the last 2 weeks, and we're going to judge it based on those. So it doesn't have to be anything long. It just has to be something that shows us what kind of a researcher are you. That's the whole idea. Like nothing crazy, because making a paper in 2 weeks is like it's very unrealistic, as Caesar knows. Like you can't make a paper in 2 weeks, and we're not expecting you to be able to make a paper in 2 weeks. But yeah, so that is the whole lesson. Any other questions, comments? And again, oh yeah, I will put the Caesar's email on the Google Classroom so you guys can ask him any questions at any time.
I also put in the chat, so if anyone has access to the chat, you can see my email there.
Yep. Again, Caesar, thank you very much for joining us. Again, I love the lab. I love the environment. Again, thank you very much. And again, thank you for all the students who joined as well. And I hope you have a great Monday. So yeah.
All right.
All right.
Hold on. I also want to maybe someone asked for the LinkedIn, so I'll just send that link as well if that's possible.
Okay, no worries. I can post on the classroom as well for all the students.
Yeah, here. I'll put it as a link tree. So because there are a lot of good questions I saw in the chat as well. And of course we can't get to them all in one day. So if you guys want to reach out on your personal time, I can also try to get back to you. But yeah, hopefully I sent the link. If you guys can access it, then you can reach out.
All right. So I'm going to post this in the classroom, your link tree as well. Oh, we have one last question. Do we have time for? Yeah. Okay, let's do one last question from Elisa. What kind of methods or data do we need to include? Okay, we discussed okay. So it's asking basically, do we need to make our own data, or can we use existing like public data sets for our research projects? Again, this could be also for our research projects or research projects in general. Like, do you prefer using public data sets or making your own data through experimentation?
For that question, I would say it really depends on the research niche that you're going for. I would say like biology, computational biology is a really common topic that most students do when it comes to trying to tackle a question in that cell biology realm. So computational data sets that are available in like a bunch of common databases would probably be the go-to method to getting data in that aspect. But I would say like for things like chemistry, physics, and all that kind of stuff, you probably want to do the experiments on your own because you're trying to actually manipulate things in real life. So really, I would suggest is do a bunch of literature review, look at what are the conventional methods done in your research niche, and then you can go upon that information to then determine what kind of experiments do you need to do. And then that's the best way of approaching that.
Yeah, great answer. And again, if you were asking for a final project, so you can use both, because a researcher can use both. But again, it's very topic dependent. Like, because when we say computational sciences, like our computational sciences basically make predictions, and our predictions are based on existing knowledge. So you can't really make new knowledge out of predictions, if that makes sense. In a sense, you have, like, for example, for physics and chemistry, as Caesar said. So yeah, again, if you have any questions for Caesar, don't hesitate. He always loves to take your guys' questions. And yeah, he's just a great mentor, great personality.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you
All right.
very much for inviting me again. It's always a pleasure to join the meetings and all that.
All right, thank you for joining as well, and we're glad that you're here. All right.
Mhm. All right.
All right, have a great day. All right, I'm just gonna, okay. Oh, there was a question. When will we actually start drafting the research paper? Is it this week or next week? So it is going to be next week. We're going to give you the information, and then you have 2 weeks. So you have the last 2 weeks of the classes that you can actually work on and draft your research paper as we go on. Again, the draft is more about showing your understanding and your style as a researcher. It's not more about how much, but about how you do the stuff that you do. So if you give us like a 10-page manuscript, we would love that compared to if you could give us a like 30-page paper that was completely generated by AI, or that you didn't have any uh, design in it, or you didn't have any actual input in it. So yeah, just do as much as you're confident in. Basically, that's a great guideline, and we will be posting it this weekend. So yeah. All right. Again, thank you guys very much for joining, and I hope you have a great rest of your Monday. So yeah.